Hi, my name is Sam Tomlinson. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to explain to you how Thomas Boone Pickens, also known as T. Boone Pickens, has become the leader that he is today, and also tell you about the life and upbringing that he experienced. First off, T. Boone was born on May 26, 1928 in Holdenville, Oklahoma. His father was a small, independent oil man who bought the mineral rights from landowners and in return sold those to big oil companies. Sometimes they had money and sometimes they didn't. So T. Boone began mowing yards as early as he could, and at age 12 picked up a newspaper route, which by the time that he moved, he had expanded his paper route 7 times larger than it was originally in order to make more money. All this money that he made, he saved underneath his floorboards. At age 16, T. Boone Pickens moved from Holdenville, Oklahoma to Amarillo, Texas, because his father had picked up a job at Phillips Petroleum, which is located, it has a refinery in Borger, Texas, which is pretty close to Amarillo. After 2 years in Amarillo, T. Boone Pickens got a basketball scholarship to Texas A&M. After 1 year there, he realized he wasn't the athlete that he thought he was, and lost his scholarship for basketball. At this point, he transferred to Oklahoma State University and switched his major to geology, the same thing that his father had done. After a few years at Oklahoma State University, T. Boone Pickens graduated and got a job at Phillips Petroleum in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. In Bartlesville, he worked on a joint interest well with a few other geologists, and after 3.5 years of working there, he was very frustrated with the management and didn't believe that they took any advice that he gave them, and also thought that it was almost like going to school where the bell rang at 8 a.m. to be there, at noon they went to lunch, 12:30 they were back, and there was a bell at 5 o'clock that rang to send them home. He didn't like the atmosphere there, and so after 3.5 years, he just quit. Threw it all away. At least his wife thought he did. But he explained to her that he had a few plans in place to help it out. At this point, he moved to the Texas Panhandle and became an independent oil man like his father. He would also go out and buy the mineral rights from landowners and sell those to other companies. But after a few years, he started petroleum exploration at the age of 28. This company began not only just buying the mineral rights and selling it to other companies, but buying the mineral rights and the reserves and developing the oil. It was his first oil company, and after a few years, his company was able to go public and become a public corporation in 1962. At this point, the name changed to Mesa Petroleum, named after the Mesa Plateaus that are in the Texas Panhandle. After a few years, his company began growing exponentially. In 1968, he followed his lead back from throwing newspapers and started expanding his company even more. His first expansion was the acquisition of Hugoton Oil. Hugoton was much, much larger than Mesa was at this point. However, he was able to buy enough stock and influence the management until they eventually gave in and he was able to acquire Hugoton. In 1972, he also acquired Pubco Petroleum, and at this point, his company was now making $15 million in profit each year. This was unheard of for a small independent oil company at that point. He began going ahead and trying to acquire other companies, which never really worked out the way that it had with Hugoton and Pubco. However, he still made a lot of money in the process. He would begin going out and finding out which companies were extremely undervalued, buying part of their stock, and then trying to convince their management to make a deal with him to either merge or be acquired by Mesa. The first of these, or the next of these, was Cities in Tulsa. And even though he didn't succeed at acquiring cities, in the process, he was able to buy enough stock and then force their management to work better and be more efficient. And then by the time he sold that stock, he made $31.5 million profit. The next company he tried to do this with was Gulf Oil. Again, he failed, but in the process, he made their company worth so much more money that his profit on the stock that he had bought and sold was $404 million. The biggest company that he tried to acquire was Phillips 66 in 1984. Working for Phillips a few years earlier made him really want to do this as well, since his father had also worked for them. It was the first big oil company, big-time oil company that he tried to acquire. In many ways, he should not have attempted this, and he went about it some of the wrong ways. But in the end, even though many people really don't like him for it nowadays, he made $89 million in profit throughout the course of this. Later, he tried to do the same thing with Unocal. Again, he failed, but he made $83 million in profit. So even though he was not succeeding at acquiring these businesses, he was succeeding at making his shareholders more money. In 1996, he eventually had to sell his company to a friend of his, and at this point he was basically forced out of being CEO, and he went ahead to sell the rest of his shares of Mesa Oil. But he started his own company called BP Capital. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It is one of the most successful hedge funds in history at this point. However, it's not always been that way. For the first few years, he had a $25 million investment that a few of his friends had invested. At one point, he had lost 95% of their money and was almost completely out of business again. But after a few more years of sticking to his guns, he eventually began making $200 million in profit for 1 year just by trading oil. He would take their money, invest it into natural gas, and eventually after the winter, he would sell it when he thought it was at the highest point and try to acquire as much profit from buying and selling shares of natural gas as he could. At one point, he made $300 million in a month. Since then, he's gone on to become a major contributor to Oklahoma State University. He's the largest donor in school history at Oklahoma State. His name is on the outside of the stadium, of the football stadium that is, and he has donated almost $1 billion to Oklahoma State University. Many people that were around the 1980s when he was going around grading different oil companies dislike him very much. However, the people in Stillwater and Oklahoma State admire him. At first, Boone Pickens, was a very authoritative leader. He did everything in his power to get money and to gain more power. However, later in his life, the last few years that he's been donating to Oklahoma State University, he's been a very, very servant-type leader. He has done everything in his power to help out a public university that he went to, as well as supply the money for scholarships to be there in case students can't afford to go to college. They can now go to college as well. At this point of his life, Boone Pickens has completely reversed how people think of him, from being an extremely, extremely hated person, especially in the towns that I grew up in of Borger, Texas, and Bartlesville, Oklahoma, to being an extremely admired man and a great leader. Thank you.